Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I am Dambisa Moyo, and I'm delighted to be the chair of this amazing panel on America's new Civil War. With me today to invigorate the discussion on my left is Sir Niall Ferguson, historian and eminent writer of numerous books. To his left is Tina Brown, well-known editor, author, and publisher of the weekly Substack called Fresh Hell, fantastic title. Next to Tina is Anand Giridharadas, who is a journalist, author, and the author of 4 books, as well as a Substack called The Ink. And then finally, at the very end, last but not least, is Coleman Hughes, writer for the Free Press, and he published a book called The End of Race Politics. For our purposes today, we're going to be here for about an hour. There will be time for Q&A. I'm going to leave the back 15 minutes for that. But why don't we get started with this team, and I'm going to ask all of them very briefly to tell us if we are at war, who is battling whom? And by that, I also want to know what the score is, but is it Democrats versus Republicans, old versus young, rich versus poor, black versus white? Who is fighting? Niall.
Well, relatively few people are literally fighting, and the notion that there's some incipient civil war is absurd. It's absurd because if you are going to have a civil war, you need the military forces in a country to divide. Both sides need to have weapons, and that is not going to happen. It's happened in the United States once before, and it is far from plausible in our time, because if you look at the divisions, particularly the partisan divisions in the United States today, they don't run across the country. There's not a North v. South divide. The divides actually run through families. They run through counties. And it's extraordinary, a kind of fractal geometry of polarization is the characteristic feature of America today. Now, it's pretty hard to have a civil war within a family, other than metaphorically. So that's the nature of the polarization. I'll add one more point. I grew up in Glasgow, as you can tell from my funny accent. I have seen sectarianism up close. And the thing that I'm struck by is that in the time since I've been living in the United States, over 20 years now, there's a sectarianism in American political life that wasn't there before. Partisan identities have become like the identities of Catholics and Protestants in the Glasgow of my youth. And that's a novel feature, and it explains the intemperate quality of contemporary political discourse. So there's a war of words, but that's not the same as a war. And hostile words or hate speech isn't violence, despite the constant claims that the radical left have made over the last 20 years that speech somehow is violence. So that would be how I'd characterize it. And I think it's a dangerous thing to use terms like civil war, just as it's dangerous to demonize your political opponents by saying, for example, Trump is Hitler, because it creates an atmosphere of antagonism which very occasionally spills over into political violence. The assassination of Charlie Kirk happened not so very long ago. And that was a very shocking event, and just the latest example of how, at the fringes of American political life, there is a potential for violence. I think that's one of the things that has been very striking about the last couple of years. The near assassination of President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, and then the actual assassination of Charlie Kirk. That's the only real cause, I think, for concern. Not civil war, but the return of political violence, and in particular assassination, as part of a very sectarian partisan polarization.
And perhaps just to add to your point, we do also recognize that there have been Democratic leaders who've also been attacked, political attacks in Minnesota, for example, where a number of people were killed, shot and killed.
Yes.
Tina, do you agree? War, is there a civil war going on? And if so, where from?
Actually, I don't think that there's enough war going on. I actually think there's a kind of...
Contrarian.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't...
Subscribe to Fresh Hell.
I don't think there's enough. I mean, you know, I read pieces about how Mexicans are really upset to see that their leaders are wearing expensive watches and going to on boondoggles in Tokyo hotels for $400 a night. And I think you're upset about that. And they're all kind of marching in the streets. And there's a lot of viral kind of anger going around in other countries about sort of inequality. But actually, sort of in America, I think we're sort of stun-gunned into kind of some strange apathy about, maybe because there's so much wealth porn around us all the time, that we just sort of, people aren't really kind of exercised enough about, for instance, the intense corruption that's happening in the Trump administration. Nobody's exercised about it at all. I mean, Mexicans are upset about expensive watches. What about the fact that, two of the Trump kids had a $2 billion investment from a UAE fund, and then 2 weeks later, the same UAE gets this huge deal for microchips from the White House. So there's all this corruption going on, and there isn't really enough. I think there's a lot of apathy, actually, and that the war is, as Niall said, it's this virtual war. It's all in the war of words. But it isn't the kind of get out into the street, hurl flaming tires kind of civil war that I think of as sort of real anger and so on.
So why do you think that is?
I think there's we're in a kind of trance, actually, and I think it's to do with this kind of blanket materialism that has taken over in America in a very interesting way. I mean, everybody's just sort of checked out. They're distracted by their social media, by watching shows that they find amusing. I think we've just sort of entertained ourselves into a kind of sort of somnambulate state, actually. And the question is, who's going to break the spell? I mean, I actually feel there's a kind of spell over America that has to be broken. And I hope it's not with actual violence, but something has to change where people just suddenly wake up and think, this is not how I want things to be.
Well, Anand, love to hear what you think. You've written a book called Winners Take All, as I mentioned, and you talk a lot about inequity in the US. Maybe you could share with us some of your perspective.
Well, first of all, you all have fallen victim of the well-known festival trick of declaring a new war that no one has heard of in the session title with a question mark, and then the room is full because you're like, is there a new war I didn't know about? So we're sorry we got you in here under false pretenses. Look, I agree. We are not in a civil war right now. That is very clear. And I think Niall is right that what we conventionally think of as a civil war is not in the immediate horizon either. But I do think there is the Cold War was a war that lasted a very long time and had a lot of effects on the world, even though it was not an ongoing military conflict. I think you could say we are in a cold civil war, which is to say we're not shooting at each other except when occasionally we are. But there is a battle for the very soul of what the United States is going to be that feels not singularly existential, but, about as existential as it gets. It's gotten there a few other times. But not, when I was growing up, lower taxes or high taxes, 30 top rate, 39 top rate. Do we do this to Social Security or do we do that to Social Security? We are now talking about, in mainstream conversations, is this a country that should be thought of as essentially a white Christian nationalist nation? There are some people on the edges, but increasingly not just on the edges, who say yes, it should be a white Christian nationalist state. And there's people who have a complete opposite view of a nation made of the world. I think there are people right now, including one who happens to run the country, who have an incredibly authoritarian vision of the use of power, who do not view a pretty long established history in the United States of observing the division of power and spreading of power as an important guardrail. There's a lot of people who share his view. And then there's, again, a lot of people who think actually the only reason you only really have a country if there's some kind of rule of law, and it's not just what one man wakes up feeling. I think there are tensions that go, as you said, Niall, correctly, down to family members, and so it's not easy to divide the country that way. But these are existential fissures, and I think more and more people don't see a way to share the country. People can't imagine a way to share the country with a lot of other people who live in it. That doesn't mean it's going to lead to a civil war, but there is a level of fatalism. I wrote a whole book arguing against this fatalism, but there is a level of fatalism around, I don't see a way to share a state with those people. And that level of feeling seems to me at a level, a preponderance in the population that feels inconsistent with a bright future for the country. I don't know what form that takes, violent, not violent, just a spiral of institutions, but it feels like the kind of thing where if you don't change it, or people don't wake up, or there's not some shift, at some point a country ceases to kind of be itself in the way that it has been before.
We're going to come back to what needs to be done, and Neil, at some point I'd love you to pick up on this idea of the state being vulnerable, because I think you've talked a little bit about the nature of the dynamic in the U.S. at the moment in a historical context. So we'll come back to you. But Coleman, before we do that, tell us if you're an outlier on this panel and you think that there's a civil war. Otherwise, we're going to have a stern talking to the organizers.
No, sadly, I agree there's no civil war, but I want to, you laid out a nice set of options of where a civil war might be. And I want to drill down on why it isn't, I think, racial, racial was one of the options. Now, say anything you want about polarization in America in the past 10 years, you can certainly make a case, an easy case, that it's gotten worse. The case you can't make is that it's gotten worse along racial lines. Now, if I bring anyone in this room back to 2015, when Trump first ran for president, as we would say in America, no one had it on their bingo card. Nobody predicted that Trump would run 3 times, and each time he ran, he would get a higher share of the Black and Hispanic vote. And by the 3rd time he ran in 2024, he got a higher share of the Black vote than any Republican president in the past 50 years. Nobody predicted that. Now, this puts to rest the notion that Trump's appeal was rooted in racism. Now, note what I'm saying here. You can't look into someone's heart, and I don't want to have the debate of whether Trump, the man, is a racist, but it's somewhat unknowable. What is knowable is what is Trump's appeal rooted in, right? If it were rooted in racism, we would not expect him to continually get higher and higher portions of the Black and Hispanic vote, and higher indeed than any other Republican in living memory. Now, the other thing I want to address is your apathy point. One reason for the apathy is, and I know in this crowd, I don't have to persuade you that Trump is corrupt. I know that you pay attention to all that news, and it's true. For the most part, Trump is corrupt. He's prosecuting his political enemies. He's creating mechanisms, at least in theory, to accept bribes through cryptocurrency and all this stuff. Now, one reason an American might feel apathetic about that is because for 4 years of Biden, there was a very serious corruption scandal surrounding Biden, wherein his son was going around the world grabbing bags of cash, sitting on oil companies in Ukraine, while his father, as VP, was in charge of Ukraine policy and got the prosecutor looking into that oil company fired, and it was mum from from the mainstream media in America outside of Fox. So there is the sense that, screw it, both sides are corrupt, why should I really care?
I think that's right. I think one of the really interesting points that we haven't touched on that's relevant to this is the decline of trust in institutions that is bipartisan. And interestingly, the institution that is almost ranked lowest is Congress. And so the general cynicism about politics is part of what I think explains the apathy. But Coleman, I'm really glad you brought up this point about Trump's appeal not having much to do with race. I remember having to argue very much against the view that Trump's victory in 2016 was a victory for white supremacy. A great deal of the coverage in the United Kingdom of American politics has made that kind of argument, and it's absolutely wrong. The fascinating thing about Trump's appeal is that it's very broad. It's broad in terms of its appeal not just to racial groups, but it's also broad in terms of its socioeconomic appeal. You can't explain Trump in terms of inequality that well, because there are plenty of really quite poor people who vote MAGA, as well as an enormous number of billionaires, probably more billionaires, who backed Harris than backed Trump. So I think one of the reasons I'm excited about this panel is that a lot of UK coverage of American politics in the last 10 years has been quite bad. And not enough people have paid attention to writers like Coleman and Anand, who are, I think, far shrewder observers of the political scene than the run-of-the-mill people who get paid to cover the US in the British media.
I hear that, Neil, but I will push back on one part of that, which is people support people in politics for all kinds of reasons. I don't think you would say, Trump's winning nearly half of women. I don't think that I don't think that means Trump's not a misogynist. It doesn't mean he didn't say and do all the things he said. Some women vote for misogynists, right? Some people of color vote for racists because that may not be the most salient issue to them, right? There were a lot of people of color in the last election who were aware, and I talked to people about, yeah, he's racist, but Biden's made it really hard for me to afford anything. I'm the provider in my family. Being a provider is a big part of my identity. That doesn't mean he's not racist. It just means their ranking of what's important to them may allow them to let him off the hook for that. I don't think it means that he, has not run on a project of restoring a kind of pre-multicultural vision of America, and certainly done so with a lot of support from Christian nationalists who have very specific racial and religious vision.
Can I just give a bit of context? Neil, you look like you want to comment.
I'm
But
gonna
before
let
you
you
do
lead.
that,
You lead.
I just want to just remind the audience, because we are in Britain, so perhaps people don't remember, or it's not top of mind, that Trump won the election handily. And yes, the margins may have been small, but he did win the popular vote. He did win all 7 swing states. He did win the Senate, and he did win Congress. So I think Coleman's point is really important to put in the broader context that, it's very hard, and we will get to this, in terms of what should the Democrats do, what did they miss? But this is perhaps a good jump point for me to send it back to you guys and say, what do you think is actually the driver? Since you've said there's no civil war, it's all fun and games, and this is just America as usual. What do you think the source of any tensions that exist is?
Well,
if you, Neil, put that, please, in a historical context for us.
Let me try and do that, because I think something that Anand said just then is not far off the mark. There is, in President Trump, a certain appeal to the past. If you look at the rhetoric of Trumpism, it has to do with free trade being unfair trade and tariffs, in fact, being a good idea. That's really been Trump's most consistent position since the 1980s, that free trade is a scam. He's somebody who clearly believes in restricting immigration. And I think the open southern border was probably the main reason that Biden's popularity cratered and Trump got re-elected. And he also believes in easy money, hence constantly leaning on the Fed. Now think of those things: tariffs plus restriction of immigration plus easy money. That is the late 19th century American recipe. It's very striking to me how late 19th century President Trump's mindset is. He even explicitly likened himself to William McKinley on the campaign trail last year. So part of what makes Trumpism unfamiliar to us is that it alludes to a past that is beyond living memory. When he talks about make America great again, it implies, the word again implies some return to the past. And whether it's Andrew Jackson, to go even further back, or William McKinley, there's a sense in which we're really going back to an almost 19th century mode of politics, including the nastiness. The verbal nastiness was the thing that... Has somebody got an old school BlackBerry in here? Because I haven't heard that sound in years. If you do have one of those quaint gadgets, turn it off. So we have this kind of rhetoric from a bygone age resurfacing. Why is that? And the answer is that the conditions that led to populism in the late 19th century came again. And what were those? A huge surge in immigration that took the foreign-born share of the US population up above 14%, which was its peak in the 1890s. Then economic volatility that we associate with the global financial crisis. And of course, the inequality that we haven't seen really since the Gilded Age. So the reason we have a kind of late 19th century figure who combines elements of, Barnum with McKinley is that we're in a kind of late 19th century America. That's why Gilded Age is a successful TV show. Tina and I had a great conversation about this for Barry Weiss's Free Press. We're in a kind of Gilded Age, and he's a very Gilded Age figure. Look at the decor in the White House. I mean, how gilded is it possible to be? So that's what's going on here. And all those confused commentators who say, we have to look at interwar Europe, he's Hitler, he's Mussolini, are totally failing to understand. He's a very American figure. And this is a very American kind of politics, but it's a politics that harkens back to the Gilded Age. And that's not familiar to people unless they've studied US history.
Tina, love to hear your perspective on all forms of media. This has been a big catalyst in the election of Donald Trump. I'd love to hear what you think, how it is playing out in terms of democracy.
Well, we're talking about, what the tensions are. And obviously, although we've all been very smart-aleck about the fact that there is no real civil war, I mean, the fact is that the real sort of tensions began, this American divide, of which there is a strong one, was all begun really by Rupert Murdoch's Fox News. Roger Ailes took over, who invented Fox News in 1993. It was a whole other kind of media that has just got more and more powerful as time went by. I mean, Roger sort of famously said, people don't want to be informed, they want to feel they're being informed. And, he established essentially a whole market in resentment, which kind of echoed his own in a sense. It was very much his own DNA, Roger Ailes. I mean, he was a blue-collar, hemophiliac, obese character who was so full of class resentments, and that he kind of weaponized brilliantly in Fox, because he was also a great producer and was a very, very powerful political strategist, from advising Nixon on down. So he really turned Fox News into this war machine for the Republicans. And it kind of got bigger and bigger and more powerful because he was so good at it. And so therefore, Republicans really thought that his channel was the only one to go on. I mean, there was a point when you could have Democrats and Republicans discussing things on television, right? But after the sort of ascendance of Fox News, no Republican would ever go on any show again except for Fox News. So that created that first sort of silo where suddenly you've got this whole channel which is talking to this whole audience, which has nothing to do with what's going on elsewhere. And then I think the second sort of leg of that whole tension has been obviously, the algorithms of Mark Zuckerberg, the understanding of, enragement is engagement. The more angry you feel, the more powerful, the algorithm is in terms of, it serves up more and more things to make you furious, because that gets you more and more clicks and hits and, and sells more ads. And so it actually became a business model. I mean, I think resentment and anger has become a digital business model, which of course has been totally exacerbated now by, now that Elon Musk has taken over Twitter. So that has become this rage machine as well. So it really, I think that, the combination of Murdoch, who has really sort of degraded journalism in 3 continents, and
No, Tina, tell us how you really feel.
Well, I mean, what he did...
I'm going to have to answer.
Well, I mean, the 2020 election where, Fox News, pretended that Dominion voting machines had rigged the election. And they just lied and lied and lied. And in the end, actually was sued and had to pay out $770 million, which didn't stop its profitability at all, which is what's so interesting. It didn't even see a blip, essentially, in its viewership. So I think the combination of those two things has been absolutely lethal for the sort of American mood.
Can I chip in?
Please.
As a columnist for The Times, I'm kind of bound to chip in at this point. I mean, the other way of looking
at Fox News, not about...
I mean, the counterfactual where there is no Fox, and the counterfactual in which that didn't happen, that would have left the established networks in the position of total dominance that they had had through the 1970s, when they were able to destroy Richard Nixon. Not that he didn't deserve a downfall, but that was the status quo pre-Fox. And although you can inveigh against Elon too, if Elon hadn't bought Twitter, a new orthodox media establishment would have persisted, which had been formed by 2020, where the big network platforms, including Facebook, including Google, had basically signed up to a censorship compact. So I think you've got to imagine a world in which there's a homogenous media landscape dominated by liberal media organizations, being challenged first by Rupert and then again by Elon. I think if those challenges hadn't happened, then it would have been quite hard for people on the right to have found any outlet for the frustrations that were not unique to Roger Ailes. So in that sense, I don't think that's the problem. I mean, I think the good news is that there is a pretty healthy ecosystem in media that reflects the divisions within the country. None of us has been excluded from public debate, but if anything, it's got much easier to enter the public sphere. The one thing I do agree with you about, and it's a key argument of a book that happens to be displayed that only people in the front row can see, The Square and the Tower, is that once media was relocated to the network platforms and monetized through ads, and once they realized that ads attracted more eyeballs if they were paired with outrageous content, we entered a different media landscape in which the incentives were to be on the extreme.
Right.
You can see that not only in the data from the platforms, but look at the way in which members of Congress behave. So the incentives in politics changed so that there was no point tacking to the center, as there had been in the 70s. Now you tack to the extremes if you want to avoid being primaried, and if you want to attract attention. If you just look at the followerships of people in Congress, the closer you are to the political center, the fewer followers, the less
That's
engagement.
great. Yeah. But that is the Fox News platform that's done it for them. They spend most of their time now trying to get that bite on Fox, that will then go viral.
I disagree. I think that is much more to do with the algorithms on the social media platforms, which reward outrage from both the left and the right.
Yes. Well, I think
And maybe I just say that there is clearly a counterbalance. Fox, sure, on the right, but there, the CNN, MSNBC are decidedly left, and I think that is.
I think that's right, but I think that it began with Fox and got more and more intense, and then the others emulated it because it was so successful.
Can I add to that?
The end.
Yeah, I was going to bring in Coleman and Anand, please.
So in my book, also well displayed for the people in the front row.
That's why we're here, folks.
We have very good data in America on race relations. In other words, Gallup has been asking Americans, do you think race relations are good or bad for decades? And they've been breaking that down by race. In other words, do black people think race relations are good? Do white people think race relations are good? And what they found is that essentially starting around 1995, race relations got better and better and better every single year and peaked in about 2012. In 2012, the majority of black Americans, white Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans all agreed race relations were good. It was a high point. Then it took an absolute nosedive, and by 2021 had cut in half for all of those races. Now, what happened? What happened is 2012, you can search your memories, but that was like roughly the year that everyone and their mother was now on Facebook and had an iPhone, right? And so to me, this is sort of like a science experiment for the competing, the rival theories here. Was it cable news? Like, I agree with you, there's a lot to hate about both the way Fox talks about politics and polarizes politics and the way MSNBC does the same exact thing on the left. However, what you see is that, at least on the racial issue, that was compatible with improving race relations for a decade and a half until Facebook and Twitter came along with the algorithm outrage machine, started showing people misleading clips of interactions between cops and citizens, put through an algorithm to show them to the people that would be most outraged by them. And to me, that social, so it's 10 parts social media, 1 part cable news, in my view, if we're talking about what has gone wrong in terms of political polarization over the past decade.
I'm going to come back to the economic backdrop, and Neil, you touched a little bit on it, but I think that that's also an interlocutor piece to the story of the race dynamics as well. And I'd love to go to Anand. Maybe that's a good segue for you. I keep pushing you to bring in your book, so hopefully this is an opportunity. You know, the book that no one can see from out there, but we can see clearly up here. I think it has a very interesting thesis that I'd love for you to share with the audience.
First of all, just one quick thing on the earlier discussion. Fox News is not just a right-wing television channel. I would love for there to be a smart right-wing television channel that, for example, took ideas like yours and discussed them on the news. That's not what Fox News is. Fox News is full of lies. It is full of disinformation. It started as brainwashing in a lot of its content. It has moved to brain mashing. I say this.
And CNN doesn't do any of that.
It is not the same at all. There's a difference between, I mean, and by the way, CNN and MSNBC have not been sued for hundreds of millions of dollars for completely concocting stories about election fraud or anything similar to it. And those of us, I don't sit in, any kind of theoretical place. I spend a lot of time with American families doing interviews. What has happened here? What has happened here? Like the number of people in America, maybe under the age of 50, who have essentially meaningfully lost, had kind of living death of their elders. Forget politics for a second. The number of millions of Americans who experience this notion. When I've spoken about this before, the number of letters I get is more on this topic than maybe anything else I've spoken about. The number of Americans who have just meaningfully lost their elders to a kind of fantasy land of beliefs about what is happening that is untethered from evidence, by the way, that is facts that you would never be associated with believing because you are an evidence-based person, that you would never be, forget politics, it is an incredibly painful, wrenching thing that has happened to our country. I think the backdrop to all of it, that is, Neil talked about this, but just to amplify, I would say the word oligarchy, rising oligarchy, and now a pretty consolidated oligarchy, is an incredibly important piece of the story of what happened, right? We have, and Neil's right, this happened in the 19th century. There was another Gilded Age. Judging by that house, you've had some Gilded Ages here too. And the reason it's important, the way people talk about inequality is often a purely economic thing, right? A Gini coefficient. The level of divide itself is not important. I mean, it is important, but the reason it's important is it cuts to something even more important, which is most people's sense of whether they live in a world in which their effort corresponds to some kind of reward that they can predict, whether they feel like their preferences matter, or whether things are just being decided in some room they can't get into, whether they feel like the future is going to be better for their kids, and then these basic human things. And democracy is such a delicate concoction. And if you just mess with that recipe a little bit, and I start feeling like, you know what, these decisions are just made by other people anyway. You know what, it doesn't matter. These healthcare things, they're never going to cover me anyway because. Once you lose that sense, and I think we've lost that sense because of growing inequality, because of growing capture of political power by the wealthy, it's very hard to lecture people about the vote. It's hard to lecture people about activism. People are not stupid. People are actually very, very astute about recognizing when they are being spun stories about their power and agency. But actually, it just lies somewhere else.
But it's worth saying, Anand, that if you look at median household income and adjust for inflation, the first Trump presidency was immensely successful for ordinary Americans, far more successful than any presidency since the 1970s. It was a 10% increase in real terms in median household income on that first Trump term. Then came Biden, and the promises were, if you think back to early 2021, very ambitious. This was going to be a new great society. Was he going to be Roosevelt? Was he going to be Johnson? It was going to be extraordinary. And what happened? 9% inflation and a decline in real median household income. I don't think democracy is weak in the United States. I think it's very strong. And people voted pretty unequivocally in the election in November against an open southern border, which obviously has a major impact on people at the lower end of the income distribution because they're competing with the illegal immigrants for jobs. And they voted against 9% inflation. And they felt, quite reasonably, that they would have a better chance of a better life if Trump were re-elected than if they had 4 more years of the Democrats, who had failed on key bread and butter issues. So I don't think people feel disempowered. I think, in fact, the democratic system did its job pretty well.
Neil, when you spend time with working class people in America, you don't think, I would say, by the way, most of them left and right feel disempowered. I'm surprised to hear you say they don't. To me, the overwhelming...
Trump. The people that I know who did not go to college, my friends in New York and Massachusetts, or go to Montana, where I spend a lot of time, in Middle America, in the heartland, they're the pro-Trump ones. Remember, the biggest predictor
they don't feel disempowered in this whole era?
of voting for Kamala Harris was having 2 college degrees. So working class people are much more into Trump than educated college graduates who all have a very different sensibility.
They don't feel disempowered just by this whole era to you?
They felt disempowered.
To me, that's the overwhelming
They felt
emotion.
disempowered by the Biden-Harris autopen presidency, and they were disempowered by it. You talk about oligarchy. Look at who the billionaires backed. The billionaires backed Harris, overwhelmingly. The billionaires who backed Trump got reviled. Elon, Mark Andreessen. So the oligarchy party lost, because that's the Democrats.
Coleman, can I ask you the following? I'm going to give you a scenario. A friend of mine was campaigning, handing out leaflets in late October, early November, in just outside of Las Vegas, Blue area, and there was a large sign outside the Sphere, the dome, the entertainment dome there, that read, "God, Family, Work, Borders, # Republican Party." Is woke dead? Because it wasn't on this list.
Yeah, so there's been a pattern in American culture for the past 5 to 10 years. That pattern is this. The left controls most cultural institutions. The teachers at your local public school are probably overwhelmingly Democrats. The professors at your local elite college are certainly 9 to 1, maybe 90 to 1 Democrats. The people that run your local museum, Democrats, probably at a similar ratio. The people who make movies are Democrats, probably not quite as extreme a ratio, but overwhelming as well. So I think it was Eric Weinstein who calls these meaning-making institutions. These are institutions that make sense out of the impossibly complex world and boil it down to something that an average person can understand. The left quite often feels these institutions are politically neutral, because ideology, as someone once said, is like bad breath. It's like, you always have it, but I don't, right? I can only smell yours. So the left controls most of the meaning-making institutions. Now, what the right does have is partly because of the electoral college system, but partly because we do live in a functioning democracy still. The right still has political power. When it wins an election, the right has taken deep exception to what they feel is a culture that they have lost, and they try to pass executive orders and laws, often heavy-handed, especially if Trump is behind them. Often he has a bull in a china shop way of going about his business, but they try to reverse the direction of the culture with law, right? So to your question, is wokeness dead? Trump is trying to kill it. Now, the problem he's going to have is, at the end of the day, in 3 years, when he's gone, and normally Americans vote for whatever we just didn't have. So the betting man would bet on a Democrat coming in next. When he's gone, it's still going to be the case that your local public school is populated by Democrats, your local museum is populated by Democrats, and on and on and on. And so that soft power and disproportion to me says that wokeness is probably not dead. It's just suffered it's lost the most recent battle.
So maybe we take a minute to move ahead because we're going to be coming into opening it up to questions. So what next? So we're coming into the close of the first year of Trump's second term. Neil, you would call that the fifth year. And we have the midterms in the United States next year. Opening up to anyone who wants to comment, what should we expect and what are sort of high watermarks or hurdles that you think we should all be watching for in terms of how the US evolves between now and the next full election?
Well, H.L. Mencken famously said that democracy is when the people get what they want good and hard. And Americans are getting what they voted for good and hard. We've gone from net migration annually at 1.3 million under Biden to 0 this year. A drastic, highly successful execution of what people voted for. We have also got the highest effective tariff rate since 1934. And if you told economists a year ago that that's where we would be, they'd all have predicted a Great Depression or at least a recession. We don't have that. Growth is slowing, but it's not likely to lead to a recession. Still, the tariffs are not popular. If you look at voters, they've got what they voted for and they don't much like it because they got it good and hard. Trump is polling especially poorly on inflation, even though inflation is at 2.9%. These very small moves that the tariffs are responsible for are going down badly. And although they were very against immigration a year ago, they've now radically changed their view in favor of it since ICE started rounding people up in the streets. So I think the problem for Trump and for the Republican Party is we are quite likely, I wouldn't say more than quite likely, to see the Democrats take back the House. Remember, the margins are very small. In both the Senate and the House. I think the Democrats have a good shot at getting back the House, despite the fact that they are extraordinarily incompetent and unpopular at this point. And that's mainly because the Democratic Party seems unable to learn the lessons of November last year. They have not really processed why they lost. Their registration of new members declining. They are in a weak position, but I still think the thermostatic effect where voters say, yeah, that's what we wanted, but not quite so hard, probably leads the Democrats to win back the House. At which point, we go through the classic pattern of a second term. Second terms lose momentum, always, especially if you don't have congressional power. You could imagine the third impeachment, as we've all said. They're going to have a lot to work with. Trump has given them so much material, I don't know where they're going to begin. So that will slow things down. There'll be no more legislation if the Democrats win back the House. And then the question, of course, will turn, because that's the way it works, to who's going to be running in 2028. So you could lose momentum next year, and we'll look back and say, wow, Trump had an amazing 2025. He crushed it in foreign policy. It's too bad that he lost momentum. One last point. In second terms, there's always a scandal. From Watergate, through all the scandals.
What more scandal could there be?
Well,
but he's a scandal machine.
Epstein has not gone away. Don't take your eye off that bomb that is ticking away. So that's my sense.
So Tina,
that things can lose momentum.
Tina, tell us, are the Democrats dead? Like who? And if you could just offer some hope, maybe throw out some names of who's going to come riding on a horse to salvage their reputation. Is it Mamdani? And maybe since the three of you all live in New York, maybe just give us an inkling of what's happening, what's going on with the Democrats.
Well, for a start, I think when Coleman was talking about Democratic sort of power across the board, I don't think that Democrats. It's about Democrats so much as the preachy, supercilious wokeness that we haven't really mentioned that cultural theory that had built up, which gave us Trump. I mean, people were just so damn sick of being lectured to and cancelled and told what to say and trying to be being made to be purists, and that is really one of the things. I think a major thing that got people really sick of the Democrats, and I'm not sure whether they've quite sort of purged themselves of that. But that has been, I think, their biggest problem, essentially. I mean, and their arrogance in seeing those polls before the election, which said that the three things Americans cared about were, immigration, inflation, and, this cultural stuff, and none of that was anything that they ever addressed. They just didn't address it. They just sailed on and ignored it in this incredible, arrogant fashion. I think that, people are very, very scared, I think, at the moment. I think that there's such a lot of volatility. We haven't mentioned AI, but there is going to be massive layoffs from AI, and I think that no one is really talking about it except for Bernie Sanders. And the amount of unemployment that's going to happen suddenly in this huge burst is going to happen because those Silicon Valley people once again have lied and said it's all going to be, we're going to create all these new opportunities and so on. But the fact is there's going to be massive layoffs, and they've already started. So you're going to see all of that happening and making people even more afraid. I think people like wrong and strong, better than, weak and indecisive. So that has been Trump's great strength, that they wanted strength. That's why they voted for Trump. They wanted authenticity. They wanted enough, no more woke, all of those things, which is why we got him. So then who can the Democrats sort of elect? And, it depends how sick of people are of the whole kind of crazy Barnum and Bailey world of Trump. I sometimes think they should just nominate Hunter Biden. I mean, hey, he's crazier than anybody else, and more corrupt, probably, as you rightly say. I think that Mamdani, who is the young, extremely idealistic, sort of socialist, very charismatic Democrat who will probably win the mayoral election in New York, has been a very exciting figure, but will also become the poster boy for everything that Republicans say about Democrats, because he's 33, he knows nothing about anything. I mean, it's, his policies are, they're endearing policies, but not policies that will, I think, work. And he's up against, Andrew Cuomo, who is this kind of running a kind of posthumous campaign. I mean, the guy's sort of dead in the water. So, but it has been nice to be excited by Mamdani. I mean, it has felt at least hopeful that there is a young, attractive, exciting guy who on the horizon instead of these terrible geriatric, these establishment Democrats who've been so deadly.
The guy is a raging socialist who's going to destroy the New York economy if he's got half a share.
But hey, he's great on social media.
But can I?
As the Californian here, can I just mention Gavin Newsom is the one?
No, the hairspray, the whole thing.
Prediction markets have him far ahead.
Well, I was told recently that for every letter of the alphabet, there is a candidate. A, AOC, B, Andy Bashir, C, Roy Cooper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Apparently, they have candidates we haven't even heard of yet. So we'll suspend that for now, but I'd love to open it up to the audience. While we're looking for hands, if anyone's interested and getting microphones, I see a hand up there. I just want to say there's so many other things we could have talked about. We haven't talked about lawfare, really. We haven't gotten to the universities and some of the issues there. The fact that corporate America is largely silent and some of the dynamics there, that might come up in Q&A. And of course, we have not talked about the sort of mirroring or mirror image of a lot of the things you've touched on, immigration, inequality, et cetera, with what's going on in the UK. So that might pop up as well in the Q&A, but let's start with the gentleman over there, please.
Hi, Joe Parkinson from Ancient to Recent. I think one thing that's slightly missing from the analysis that you guys had is that part of this, we broken media model that makes it possible for media run responsible reporting, so therefore they become more extreme and we get the army. So
we're having a problem with your mic, I'm afraid. Let's try this one.
Thank you very much. That's much better. So love the conversation.
Short so we can get some other questions in too. Sorry to rush you, but go ahead.
What role do you think that the broken media model, the business model, the inability of corporations to actually be able to make money through reporting responsibly, that therefore leads to a sort of greater extremism and the what I like to call Piers Morganification of our media landscape plays in shaping our politics?
Tina, do you want to take that?
I think it plays a major, major role, absolute major role. I think that the lack of it. Investigative journalists are, the watchdogs of society, right? And they are the truth tellers, and they're the ones who, one of the few people left, few professions left where people truly aren't working for money because they can't make any money, but they sit in their basements and they write, exposés that end up being wildly important. And I think that the collapse of the sort of media model, the media economics, is the great tragedy of our times. And I think it is more important even than the other cable news things, etc., because there just aren't outlets anymore for serious journalism that lands a punch. And even if they do their pieces and they do land the punch in some ways, it's in a silo where the other half of the country isn't reading it. So I think it's a major factor in the place that we're in.
Thank you very much. There's a question right here in the front. Can we get a mic here, please? So you just put your hand up a little. Yeah, there you go.
Hi. So having worked in many news organizations and sat in hundreds of editorial meetings, I can tell you that news editors are generally quite lazy. They chase the clicks, they chase public opinion. That's what the sponsors want. So the question to the people on the right, actually not on the right, stage left, is do you really believe that the American public are that easily swayed when all of the tide of the media is going to the left and skewing to the left, and that sponsors and news editors are that patient to create a movement to then serve? Because it seems like that's what you're implying, that Fox News created this out of the blue and amplified it and fanned the flames. So I think it was there to a huge amount before.
Do you want to take that?
No, I don't think the American public is that easily swayed. And I'll just give one example. Throughout the first 3 years of Biden's presidency, the majority of Americans polled said that he was too old to run for president. We were seeing numbers like 60, 65%. That's important because it means it was not just Republicans. It was many Democrats saying that as well. And I was a commentator for CNN during 2 of those years, and I remember every time the topic came up, because we'd cover these polls, sometimes we did the polls, no one on the panel, except maybe the one token Republican and myself, would even entertain the idea that Biden was too old. It was foreboding. And what this tells me is that despite the fact that CNN, MSNBC, and many others were pushing a certain line with Biden, as was the New York Times, right? The line being that he was doing backflips and reciting Shakespeare sonnets backwards at the same time. Even Democrats didn't believe it because they could see in press conferences he was struggling. So with issues like that, yeah, you can't really get one over on the people.
Here's a hand here.
It's a pretty good illustration of what was wrong with Anand's point, that the lying is only on Fox. The big lie of the Biden presidency was that he was okay. And it was astonishing to watch that be sustained until finally it began to crack. But it only really began to crack last year with the Wall Street Journal running a piece. Some of us have been going around saying it. I remember saying it at an event like this and then being berated by a very senior Democrat. How dare you say that about the President of the United States? It was obvious the guy was senile, but the big lie persisted.
Yeah, no.
Here we go, right here. Thank you.
I wanted to know your thoughts about the future of free speech, because it's being reported a lot in the media now that it's Donald Trump's aim to get rid of free speech.
Oh, that's absurd. In fact, it was really the project of the left to get rid of free speech by defining anything that the left disagreed with as hate speech. The campaign to eradicate free speech originated at the universities, and I speak from bitter experience, having spent too much of the last 20 years dealing with cancel culture, first at Harvard, then at Stanford. If you actually look at the Trump campaign from last year, Trump set out clearly to re-establish free speech by attacking those agencies that were trying to kill it off. So I think the exact opposite is true. The real threat to free speech came from the increasingly intolerant left, which, as Coleman said, dominated the cultural institutions, including, you didn't mention it, the foundations. So I'm happy to say that free speech won a big victory in November, and that is why, as a writer for Barry Weiss's Free Press. I'm celebrating this week because Barry won a huge victory. She now is taking over as editor-in-chief of CBS. So the hegemony of the intolerant, illiberal left has been shattered. And that's good.
Anand, do you want to respond to that?
I do.
Okay.
It's not incorrect that there has been a problem of cancel culture and stuff on the left, and none of that has involved masked men picking people up off of the street and throwing them into vans for their opinions, which has started in January under this presidency for student protesters protesting the war in Israel and Gaza. That is a real thing that has happened. You all know it has happened. No one is going to be able to tell you that is not a thing that has happened. Or the United States government going to these universities and doing Tony Soprano threats and deals with them, getting into the content of what certain people teach and what departments can do and not do. I'm sorry, cancel culture is a problem, and I have written about that problem. And I think the left is often too squeamish, but you cannot confuse that cultural problem with the deployment of the state power of the United States government. These are qualitatively different things. There are serious people, colleagues of all of ours, I'm just telling you empirical things. There are colleagues of all of ours who now, for the first time in their lives, have a different procedure for when you enter the United States. You turn your phone off when you land, you disable Face ID on your iPhone, you go all the way through, and you turn it back on. That is something that happens in many places in the world. That is not something that has happened in the United States, a kind of thing that people have had to think about. And people have been detained, including a Substacker. We're all on Substack in different forms. A non-American citizen for things he wrote on Substack, detained because of
Let's just be clear. People are being deported for violating immigration law. It's not that ICE is out there policing your social media. If you want to get arrested in an airport,
you don't think protesters have been deported
for their
opinions?
Can I just finish? The issue of deportation has become very easily confused with the issue of free speech. I think the heavy-handed tactics of ICE have inflamed sentiment, but I would ask you, is it plausible that people would deport themselves? If you're really serious about getting the very large number of illegal immigrants out of the United States, how else do you expect it to be done? Are you going to invite them to a tea party and then drive them in limos to the airport? There was bound to be some coercion in this
Neil,
process.
they've picked up people for their opinions. You know that.
Deportation.
They've picked up people for their opinions.
As far as letting people in and out of the country is concerned, you're talking here in the UK where you can get arrested at Heathrow Airport for jokes that you made on social media. The problem of free speech is much more acute in the UK than it is in the US. You're in denial if you don't agree with me.
Neil, don't forget,
There's a First Amendment in the United States. There is not one here.
What about the acute lawfare that has happened, since Trump took over?
Since Trump took over? Lawfare began then? I'm sorry. The lawfare began when the Biden administration decided to go after Trump in multiple lawsuits that were designed to prevent him ever returning to American politics. That was when lawfare began. Not at the beginning of this year, but back in 2021.
I meant against media companies.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but I did promise to take one last question from the hand there. So we'll take that question, and then we'll wrap up with my shy and retiring panel. Please keep your question short.
Yeah, just a very simple one, keeping it local. What are the lessons and outlook for UK?
Neil, you were already on your soapbox, so go for it.
So, I will keep it. If you want me to shut up, I'll keep it very brief.
Guys, can I just say, we don't need that. We don't need to insult each other, okay? We've all paid. We're all happy to be here. We've come for a day out. I really have a problem with people swearing and yelling at people like that. That's unacceptable. And by the way, it's not to say that the comment is not fair. Let's get other people to comment as well, but let's please take it down a tone. It's ridiculous. This is just not going to work for our society. Please, Neil, quickly, and then we'll open it up.
What was the question again? All the
what are the lessons from the UK?
made me forget it.
Well, I think one obvious lesson is that the UK's economy is in desperate need of revitalisation. That is not going to come from ever higher taxes. Another lesson is that if there isn't a serious attempt to address public concerns about immigration, then populism will gain ground, but in the UK, not within the Conservative Party, but outside it, in Reform UK. And I'll just conclude by reiterating what I said before. You're in denial if you think that this country doesn't have a free speech problem that is much larger than any problem in the United States.
I know the other three, some version of not living in Britain, but what do you have to say?
Listen, I personally come to England and feel so overjoyed by the sanity I feel here. And I feel, I have actually got to the point in America where I watch C-SPAN's, the live coverage of House of Commons debates to calm me down. I take, instead of Ambien, I'll just think, I'll just watch a little bit of the House of Commons and I see this boring person having a polite argument with this boring person, and they politely come to the wrong decision altogether. And I'm so happy because it's not just, we live in a country where you have the Vice President of the United States, tweeting out, I don't give a shit what you think. It's like, where do we get to here? The coarsening, which we haven't discussed, of language and attitude and the gross crassness of the way people talk and behave in our public life now is so demoralizing that I come to England and I do see, people still sort of can talk to one another and so on. I do think that England should, it's people love to sneer at the BBC. Please hang on to the BBC because, it is a force for civilization in my belief. It has its issues, it has, but it is, try living without it. We now only have these kind of insane kind of cable things and social media and all the rest of it, so hang on and care about the BBC. And, I just think that we've really got to appreciate the civility of this country and not allow it to go the way of the US. When suddenly, Musk appears at that march, F off, Musk. You've got absolutely nothing to do with this country. How dare you even show your face? That's how I feel.
So, Coleman and Anand, I would love to hear your final thoughts. We'll wind it up with the two of you. You don't have to answer specifically about Britain if you don't want to, but perhaps broadly speaking, what advice do you give us in terms of navigating the sort of more volatility, more noise? Just give us some sense of what you think is going to be important and what we should be focusing on.
Well, far be it for me to give you guys advice. I don't presume to really know, but I do want to address myself as my last comment to this free speech issue because I could feel the energy and, frankly, the anger in the room about it. It is true, quite simply, that though neither the right nor the left has a perfect record, we've had 10 years of left-wing cancel culture. For every Jimmy Kimmel, there was a Megyn Kelly that nobody over here cared about, and she actually got fired for even questioning whether a child could dress up like Beyonce if she wanted to, if it's a white child. Yeah, she got fired for that, and nobody cared, right? And that goes to show, again, if you didn't hear about that and you did hear about Kimmel, you have to think about what is my news diet, and is it biased? That's the first point, and then the point I'll leave with is that to run a very simple experiment about which country has the bigger free speech problem right now. Compare an American citizen to a British citizen, so as not to conflate the issue of people with green cards and people that can get deported. Write a Facebook post as an American citizen on any topic you want, no matter how inflammatory. Say you hate immigrants, say you hate white people, say you hate black people, say it in all caps. I guarantee you there is a 0% chance a policeman will come knocking on your door.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you say that about your own country right now?
Yeah. Well said.
Anand, for the final word.
I'll make it not UK specific. I think what I'm going to say grows out of what's happening in America, but I think in some ways it's happened in lots of places in the world when we think about why we're living in an age where populism and authoritarianism are flaring up in lots of different places, in lots of different contexts, sometimes connected to each other as movements, sometimes not. 4 very quick thoughts about what we need to do. I think someone talked about introspection, the Democrats. There is almost, we just live in such a defensive rather than introspective age in general. And if we don't want authoritarians to rise in all these places, whether it's India, whether it's the United States, we have to actually have a serious culture of introspection that is fearless and be willing to ask why we're not connecting with people, why parties that want to help everyone economically don't land with people, why they don't make them feel empowered when that's what they're running on. Introspection is very important. Second, we have to have a real program of helping people cope with change and progress. We often just start trading with China, everybody loses their manufacturing jobs. Good luck, everyone. Good luck with your new sense of self. We've transformed masculinity by, no one makes furniture in North Carolina anymore. The last 8 generations of men did that. Now no man makes anything. Good luck. We got to help people cope with racial change and progress. We've changed so much in the status of women. I'm very happy about that. But we don't help people figure out who they are on the far side of these changes. A lot of my reporting work over the years, the reason toxic movements rise is because people are left grasping and don't know who they are in the bigger project of the future. And lastly, I would say I think we need political movements that can unify people around economic change that benefits everybody, and then tell a story on the cultural stuff, tell a story that brings everybody in instead of lectures them, instead of uses terms that people can't understand, but doesn't avoid those issues also. Tells a galvanizing, thrilling story about how it's better when we live, there we go, how it's better when we live with people who are different from us. It fortifies us, it ennobles the soul to confront difference, to confront variety, and tell a story that is better than the nativists and better than the authoritarians and better than the chauvinists. A story about how it's wonderful, actually, as we all do, to live in places of the world, to places where people collide and mix. Everyone around the world who is defending that vision has generally failed in our era to tell that story in a way that is more thrilling and inviting than the small-hearted alternative. And I think it's time we learn to tell that story.
Well, we'll end on that. Thank you so much for your engagement. Much appreciated.